This is our fourth and final lecture on West Asia, which we have entitled as a peace to end all peace. So, in this last lecture, we'll discuss about the Gulf War of 1990 and 1991, which stands as a defining geopolitical event of the late 20th century in the Middle East, making a critical transition in global military strategy and international relations. This was triggered by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in August 1990. The conflict transformed from a regional crisis into a massive USA-led international endeavor known as Operation Desert Storm. It introduced the world to high precision, smart warfare and reshaped the security architecture of the Middle East for decades to come. Gulf War was a massive international conflict triggered by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait on August 2, 1990. It represented a turning point in modern history, making the first time a global coalition sanctioned by the United Nations moved in unison to liberate a sovereign nation. The war is famously divided into two primary phases. One is Operation Desert Shield, and the second one, Operation Desert Storm. So, the very background of this conflict, if you visit the very roots of the conflict, were not purely military, they were deeply tied to economic and colonial era border disputes. One of those background is that Iraq's sovereignty claims under Saddam Hussein argued that Kuwait was historically part of Iraqi territories, specifically the province of Basra. The second route that we found Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, where Iraq was left with over almost 80 billion debt and caused a huge economic crisis, and Saddam Hussein, the then president of Iraq, pressured Kuwait to forgive the loans Iraq had taken during the Iran-Iraq War of 1980s. Another factor is regarding oil and land drilling. Tension peaked with Iraq accused Kuwait of land drilling using advanced technology to steal oil from Iraq's Rumalia oil field across the border. Another factor was the OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries disputes. Iraq demanded that Kuwait stick to oil production quotas. Kuwait's overproduction kept global oil prices low, which crippled Iraq's ability to pay off massive debt. So there became a 35 nation coalition, and that is when one of the most remarkable aspects of the Gulf War, and that is relating to the level of international operation led by the United States, a coalition of 35 countries and forces. Key military contributors were United States, United Kingdom, France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Syria. The total troop strength of the coalition as they mobilized 9 lakh 50,000 personnel while Iraq deployed an estimated 6 lakh troops. The involvement of Arab nations like Egypt and Syria was vital as it framed the conflict as a defense of international law rather than a Western crusade. So the operation that was in the phases, the first one, that is the Operation Desert Strom, which started from August 1990 up to January 1991. This was the defensive phase. The primary goal was to protect Saudi Arabia from a potential Iraqi invasion. It involved a massive build-up of troops and equipment in Saudi Desert, and the second operation that ran from January 17 to February 28, 1991 was known as Operation Desert Strom. This is the combat phase with an intense air campaign. For 5 weeks, coalition forces under the guided minutant and stealth technology to destroy Iraqi command centers and air defenses. The third operation, that was known as Operation Desert Strom, which is an 100-hour war, and this was the final ground offensive. It lasted only 100 hours, during which coalition forces executed a famous left hook maneuver, encircling Iraqi forces and forcing a rapid retreat from Kuwait City. So the international contribution to the coalition was Operation Granby by the UK military contribution, then Operation Dagoud by France specialized ground and air environment, and Operation Friction was Canada's naval and air support. So the combat campaign and operation thereafter of war spread across Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Persian Gulf. The air war was focused on Baghdad and Mosul to disrupt Iraqi leadership. A defining moment where retreating Iraqi columns were trapped and destroyed by coalition air power on the road to Basra, which was famously named as the Highway of Death. Then the missile attacks in an attempt to break the coalition Iraq launched missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia, hoping to provoke Israel to enter the war, which would have alienated the Arab allies. So we will discuss about those casualties and the human cost. Coalition forces approximately 292 deaths, 147 in combat. Iraqi forces estimated 20,000 to 50,000 deaths and over 75,000 wounded, and regarding civilians, Iraqi civilian deaths were estimated at over 3,600 directly from the war. The post-war uprisings and sanctions significantly increased the long-term. So now we'll discuss the very geopolitical impacts. The Gulf War ended on February 28, 1991 with the liberation of Kuwait. However, the victory left a complex legacy. Kuwait sovereignty was restored, returned to its monarchy, and a United Nations monitored demilitarized zone was established. Environmental disaster, retreating Iraqi troops, sabotage over 600 oil wells, causing one of the worst environmental catastrophes in history. The war proved the dominance of smart technology forever, changing how modern militaries train and fight. The road to 2003 while leaving Saddam Hussein in power but under heavy sanctions, the conflict created a state of contained hostility that eventually led to the 2003 Iraqi invasion. So the Gulf War 1991 fundamentally reshaped the global order by establishing the United States as the world's sole superpower following the Cold War. It introduced a new world order centered on collective security and United Nations backed intervention. So, why assembling a 35 nation coalition under a United Nations mandate? United States demonstrated its capacity to project military power globally and solidify the US role as the world's sole superpower, shifting international security from a bipolar Cold War standoff to a system where United States drives up global security intervention. The war introduced the revolution in military affairs, proving that precision guided, satellite guided navigation or GPS and stealth technology could achieve objectives with minimal collateral damage compared to traditional warfare. This shifted global military doctrine from mass mobilization to high tech surgical strike capability. The establishment of a permanent large scale US military footprints in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region to ensure regional stability and secure global oil supplies. However, the presence became a major point of contention and was later leveraged by extremist groups to radicalize local population, contributing to instability that eventually led to the 2003 Iraq War. The post-war period saw the institutionalization of long-term economic sanctions against Iraq, coupled with no-fly zones. This strategy established a blueprint for how the United Nations and international powers would handle rogue states in the future. The Gulf War proved to be more than a regional liberation. It was a watershed movement that validated the power of collective security and high-tech diplomacy by successfully restoring Kuwait's sovereignty and establishing a new world order. The conflict left a dual legacy of military triumph and unresolved regional tensions that would ultimately redefine Middle Eastern geopolitics for the 20th century. So, these are the very developments that we have discussed relating to the Gulf War. Now we would like to discuss why did the cause of conflict and how it explore regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict timeline. So the very question of Israel and Palestine conflict, which already that we have discussed in our past lecture. So now we'll discuss the very developments after the Camp David Treaty and the Iran-Iraq War and the end of Iran-Iraq War in 1980, then the Gulf War that was ended in particularly in the year 1991. So we'll discuss about the Madrid Peace Conference, where the Madrid Peace Conference begins in particularly in the year 1991 on particular October 30th, which was by attendance of the then President of United States, George S. W. Bush, who addresses the Middle East Peace Conference at the Royal Palace in Madrid, Spain. So, the Madrid Peace Conference began sponsored jointly by United States and the Soviet Union, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestinian and Syrian delegates attend the first negotiation among those parties. The talks proceeded along bilateral talks between Israel and its neighbors, though the Lebanese and the Syrian delegation and the Jordanian team includes Palestinian representatives. A multilateral track includes the wider Arab world and addresses regional issues. The talks last for 2 years without any breaking or breakthroughs. So again the Oslo Accords that was on September 13, 1993. Israeli Prime Minister Isaac Rabin, Foreign Minister Simon Peres, and Palestine Liberation Chairman Yasser Arafat, who in the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994, a secret negotiation in Norway resulted in the Declaration of Principles on Interim Self-Government Arrangements, also known as the Oslo Accords. Before the Accords are signed, Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization recognize each other in an exchange of letters. Israel and the PLO agreed to the creation of the Palestinian Authority to temporarily administer the Gaza Strip and West Bank. Israel also agrees to begin withdrawing from parts of the West Bank through large swaths of land and Israeli settlements remained under the Israeli military's exclusive control. The Oslo Accords envisioned a peace agreement by 1999. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, Israeli Prime Minister then Yitzhak Rabin, and Israel Foreign Minister Simon Peres with the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994. They won for their efforts to the Oslo Accord. So, another great development made in the year 1994, in particularly the Gaza-Jericho agreement. So, Yasser Arafat, the president of Palestine Liberation Organization, shakes hands with Israeli Prime Minister Rabin at the signing of the Gaza-Jericho agreement on May 4, 1994. So, another development of October 26, 1994 was relating to Israel and Jordan. They signed a peace treaty. So, Israel and Jordan signed a peace treaty setting their territorial dispute and agreeing to future cooperation in sectors such as trade and tourism. This is Israel's second peace treaty with an Arab state. It accords special administrative responsibilities for Jerusalem's Muslim holy places to Jordan. And now we'll discuss the development made on September 28, 1995, the second Oslo Accord, where USA President Bill Clinton, Israeli Prime Minister Rabin, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, Jordan's King Hussein, and Yasser Arafat, the chief of PLO. They are signed the Israeli-Palestine interim agreement at the White House. Israel and Palestine negotiators signed the interim agreement. Sometimes it is called Oslo Second Accord. It gives the Palestinians control over additional areas of West Bank and defines the security, electoral, public administration, and economic management that will govern those areas until a final peace agreement is reached in March 1999. So now we'll discuss about the Camp David summit that was another development from July 11, 2000 to July 25, 2000, where Vice President Bill Clinton hosts Israeli and Palestine leaders for talks at Camp David, United States of America. Reports indicate that Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak is prepared to accept, among other things, Palestinian sovereignty over some 91% of the West Bank and certain parts of Jerusalem. The deal would include a land swap in which some Israeli land would go to the Palestinians in compensation for the remaining 9% of West Bank, which would go to Israel. 2 weeks of intense discussion, however, fails to produce an agreement. President Clinton blames Yasser Arafat for the failure before leaving office several months later. Clinton, the then American president, lays out proposals for both sides. Talks between them continue but without success. So now we'll discuss those other developments made in the West Asia peace accord. So in that connection, in 2003, on April 30, the USA Secretary of State Colin Powell gave a joint news conference with other leading diplomats about the issue in Middle East at World Economic Forum meeting in Jordan in 2003. The informal group created to pursue Middle East peace campaign, the United States, Russia, the United Nations, and the European Union put forth a roadmap to for peace based on the outline President George W. Bush offered in his 2002 speech. The roadmap laid down a plan for peace based on Palestinian reforms and a cessation of terrorism in return to an end to Israeli settlements and a new Palestinian state. And as regarding the development in August 15, 2005, an agreement with Gaza made by Israel. So on August 21, 2005, a Jewish settler courts as it was Israel begins a unilateral withdrawal of settlers and military forces from the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military remains in control of Gaza's borders, except the Gaza-Egypt border, which is controlled by Egypt, airspace and coastlines after Israel's withdrawal. Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other smaller militant groups fire rockets from Gaza into southern Israel. So, in that context, we will discuss the expansion of Hamas power in Gaza in the year 2006, exactly on January 29. So, Hamas defeats Fatah, a Palestinian political faction founded in 1950, which was a long dominant faction with the Palestine Liberation Organization in Palestinian election. The United States and other countries suspend their aid to the Palestinian Authority because they consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization. Fatah and Hamas to be a terrorist organization. Make a deal to govern the West Bank and Gaza Strip together. The deal quickly falls and Hamas takes over the Gaza Strip in 2007. So, now we'll discuss another major development of the 2008 December 27. Israel attacked the Gaza Strip following really 800 rocket attacks from Gaza on Israel towns in the months of November and December. The war lost less than a month but killed hundreds of civilians in addition to hundreds of combatants and spark international criticism. So now we'll discuss another development, and that was relating to the negotiations attempted on July 28, 2013. The Secretary of State of United States John Kerry seeks to restart final status negotiation. The process begins with Israel's agreement to release 104 Palestinian prisoners and the Palestinians' agreement not to use their new observed status at the United Nations to advance the cause of statehood. Negotiation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority collapsed in April 2014 over such issues as Israeli settlement growth, the status of a final round of prisoners, and Palestinian attempts to join several international organizations. So the tensions rose between the Palestine Liberation Organization and Hamas, and that was exactly on April 23, 2004. So, the Palestine Liberation Organization and Hamas sign an agreement to form a unity government. Tensions between the factions remain, however, and no unity government is formed. Gaza and the West Bank remain disconnected and under the control of rival Palestinian leaderships. So, in that connection, we'll discuss another important operation, and that is known as Operation Protective Edge, which occurred from July 8, 2014 to August 26, 2014. After tit-for-tat attacks on Israel and Palestinian civilians by the estimates on both sides, Israel invades the Gaza Strip. The operation, codenamed as Protective Edge, lasted for 50 days, killing about 2,000 Gazans, 66 Israeli soldiers, and 5 Israeli civilians. Unlike the conflicts from 2008 to 2009 and in 2012, Palestinian rocket fire targets major Israeli cities. The war ends after the United States, in consultation with Egypt, Israel, and other regional powers, broke a ceasefire. So, the development of 2017, where the US formally recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, changing long-standing USA policy. US President Donald Trump formally recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He also pledges to move the USA embassy from Tel Aviv to that city, though the move is not set to occur immediately. Numerous foreign leaders, including those of Egypt, France, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and United Kingdom, along with United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, criticized the policy change. It also sparked protests and violence throughout East Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank, as well as in Egypt, Iran, Iraq, and Jordan. In January 2018, Palestinian President Muhammad Abbas declines to meet the USA Vice President Mike Pence during the Pence trip to the region. So, in 2019, March 25, the United States recognizes Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. The Trump administration recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which Israel had formerly annexed from Syria in 1981. The United States was the first country other than Israel to recognize Israel's sovereignty over that territory. Again on 2020, in particularly on January 28, the Trump administration unveils its proposed Israeli-Palestinian peace plan crafted by US and Israel diplomats without Palestinian input. The plan called for a two-state solution with significant economic aid to the Palestinians. Many analysts criticize the plan as being one-sided, stipulating impossible requirements for Palestinian statehood and paving the way for Israeli annexation of the West Bank. Palestinian authorities reject the plan immediately following the plan's announcement. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announces Israel's plans to annex portions of the West Bank as outlined in the Trump's proposal. Further, we would like to discuss the development made on September 15, 2020. The relation between some Arab countries and Israel was normalized. Britain and the United Arab Emirates agreed. Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates agreed to normalize diplomatic relations with Israel, becoming the first Arab countries to do so in over 25 years. In return, Israel announces the suspension of its plan to annex territory in West Bank. Morocco and Sudan subsequently also signed onto the agreement and normalized relations with Israel. Another development made to the West Asia Middle East crisis was the crisis between Israel and Hamas in 2021. Election of Palestinian in East Jerusalem and clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque spark conflict between Israel and Hamas. Over 200 people in Gaza and at least 10 in Israel died. The then American President Joe Biden's administration helped mediate a truce and restore some US aid and diplomatic contact with the Palestinians. So now we'll discuss another major development in the field of West Asia Middle East crisis in the year 2022 that was deadly here in Israel and Palestinian conflict as Israel launched a counter-terrorism operation in the West Bank in response to attacks by Palestinians against Israel Jews. is the operation and resulting resurgence which contributed to the deadliest year for both sides since 2005, an uptick in violence that only turned out to rise in 2023. So now we'll discuss another development of 2023, that was happened on October 7, where Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups launched a surprise attack on Israel. So Hamas, supported by other Palestinian armed groups, launched an unprecedented surprise attack on Israel, leading to an explosion of violence. According to the Israel government, the attack killed approximately 1,200 people, most of them civilians. Militants also take over 200 hostages. It was the deadliest attack in Israel history. Israel responded by launching a deadly counter-offensive aiming to eradicate Hamas in Gaza. So international bodies, including the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice, had since launched investigation into both Israel and Hamas officials for violation of international law. Both parties rejected the claims made by the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice. Another major development to the Middle East and West Asian crisis that we would like to discuss developed from September 17, 2024 to November 27, 2024, where Israel expands operation into Lebanon. Nearly a year after the October 7 attacks, tension escalated between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, which had expressed support for Hamas in Gaza and has historically received support from Iran. Hezbollah had been exchanging aerial attacks with Israel since October 7, but the conflict with Israel since October escalates in September after Israel launches a coordinated attack against Hezbollah operatives using explosive pager devices. In the following weeks, Israel launched a series of aerial attacks that killed the group's long-time leader as well as other senior Hezbollah members. Then in October, Israel forces mount a ground invasion in southern Lebanon, armed and aimed at dismantling the group in support of Hezbollah. Iran launched over 150 ballistic missiles at Israel, raising fears of escalation into a wider regional war. Israel and Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire in late November, although sporadic attacks continue in its wake. Now we'll discuss the major development made in between January 2025 and March 2025, and that was regarding the ceasefire agreement which proves short-lived. So, the Israeli government and the Hamas agreed to a ceasefire, which takes effect in January 2025. Under the terms of the ceasefire, Hamas began releasing hostages, while Israel released Palestinian prisoners in exchange. Israel also agrees to allow humanitarian aid through to address their humanitarian situation for residents in Gaza. The ceasefire initially laid out a path toward the full end of the war. However, within months, both sides began accusing each other of violating the terms of the agreement. So, in March 2025, Israel launched renewed airstrikes and blocks aid and energy going into Gaza, and in May 2025 it renewed full scale ground operations. Meanwhile, ongoing attempts to mediate a new ceasefire agreement remain unsuccessful after more than a year of fighting. Israel and Hamas remain in conflict. Nearly 60,000 Palestinians have been killed, many of them civilians. Over 50 Israeli hostages are still held by Hamas. So, these are the major developments made up to 2025. And finally, the last phase that we would like to discuss and that would be considered as Operation Epic Fury, which was launched by the joint armed forces and airstrike by United States and Israel. So, the United States and Israel launched what the latter called a decisive and unprecedented campaign against Iran, which retaliated with barrages of missiles that sent residents running for cover. Exactly on 28th February 2026, in cities across West Asia. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates reported missile damage in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and one civilian dead in an Iranian attack as blast from air defense, and Tehran's missile salvo also echoed over Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, Yemen, Kuwait, so as well as Israel. So, in that connection, we found that the elimination of imminent threat, the attacks came after United States President Donald Trump expressed frustration at Iran's stance in negotiation over its nuclear and missile programs. Trump said Washington goal was eliminating imminent threats from Iran while Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the operation was to remove an existential threat. So, in that connection, already we have discussed the very proxy role played by the Iranian Islamic Republic with relying on its network of non-state allies like Hezbollah from Lebanon, Hamas from Palestinian grounds, the Houthis from Yemen. The deterrent wave has now been significantly degraded by Israeli operations. So, Iran faces the uncomfortable reality that its led deterrence no longer carries the same credibility. So, in that connection, the further developments that relates regarding the very war, and that is in attacking Iran President Trump and Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have crossed a line from confrontation into open defense of what remains of international law. There is no credible legal framework that justifies a sweeping military campaign of this scale. No one with an ounce of sense will mourn the very death of the brutal dictator like Khamenei. But that does not put a legal pink ribbon on the war. Ayatollah Khamenei savagely crushed dissent whenever it surfaced, from the Iranian Green Movement to the 2022 uprising sparked by the death of Masa Amini. The state's answer was consistent: force, fear, and fatalities. Many Iranians feel terrified and estranged from the leadership, brute authority grafted unto a society yearning to breathe. Sanctions fueled in part by Tehran's incredible rhetoric and regional adventurism have punished citizens far more than the elite. Till now, the regime survived. The public paid the price. But let's not forget the Ayatollah regime cultivated a wave of armed actors such as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Quds Force, the bases. Allah. In a protracted conflict, those net wars can ignite flashpoints across West Asia, turning a bilateral clash into regional chaos. In the past 36 hours of the conflict, Iran targeted Israel, put US military assets in the region in its crosshairs, and hit some installations in Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and even Saudi Arabia. The impact seemed limited, but what if Tehran's warning of a great retaliation is borne out? So, in that connection, we would like to discuss the very game that is being played at Gulf. Iran continues hitting targets across America, West Asian allies, and in particularly the Gulf monarchies like United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia have more than to lose in this war with Iran. Minus Iran, West Asia is a roughly 4.5 trillion dollar GDP territory, and images of Shidwa is Fairmount farm hotel burning after a missile strike. So things were suffering and would be different during as it was in 1990s Gulf War. West Asia practically lived off oil and gas then. So the world needed both. So when war ended, things went back to the old normal. But West Asia today is a different kind of economic powerhouse. Almost 77% of United Arab Emirates economy is based on non-oil sectors. It's 73% of Oman, 66% for Qatar, and even Saudi is at 57% in last year's global financial centers index. Dubai was 12th, ahead of Washington DC, Dublin, Geneva, and Paris. To get here, all of these countries have pursued growth in areas like finance, real estate, and tourism while projecting an image of safety and stability. In fact, Iran is flying drones and missiles at them. Never mind that most of or all of these are intercepted is enough to spook investors, tourists, and also immigrant workers. That's why Gulf royals need to actively bat for cessation of hostilities. Oman is, say, USA Iran talk were progressing well and Iran had agreed to many demands. So war was unnecessary in the first place. After Ayatollah Khomeini's killing, a return to the table may be difficult, but it is not impossible. India, which has its own long-term interest in the region for energy security, a 10 million strong workforce, and billions of dollars in remittances should do its part as it is trusted by both Gulf nations and Israel. Trump has said he can warp up Operation Epic Fury in 4 weeks, but West Asia cannot wait that long. It must seek peace on a war footing. So, in that connection, we found the very position and the crisis relating to oil. So, oil prices were rising before Iran war started on 28th February 2026. The question now is how high will they go? Analysts say it depends on how long war lasts. When Israel attacked Iran last June, oil briefly jumped from less than $70 a barrel to around $80, which was far below the $100 to $120 barrel analysts had predicted. But that was a 12-day war, this time amid US building and build off. Oil had already touched $72.5. It expected to notch $75 and rise up to $100 per barrel eventually if war drags on. So a prolonged war will impact West Asian oil supplies to big buyers like India and China in three ways. One, the first one, tankers cannot sail through Strait of Hormuz under Iranian fire. And the second, Iran targets neighbors' wells and refineries. And the last one, its proxies in Yemen. The Houthis once again close Red Sea route to ship. It tankers reroute around South Africa. Some 20 million barrels of oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, Delhi, roughly equal to India-China combined daily demand. There's no easy way to replace it after India scaled back Russian supplies under USA pressure. Its dependence on oil from Iraq and Saudi Arabia has increased. So oil at $100 a barrel is bad news beyond pump prices because it will stoke inflation. By some estimates, 0.6 to 0.7 percentage point increase is possible. That will slow down economic growth. If dollar strengthens, it likely will. The hit will be even harder. But how bad things get will also depend on how United States and China use their strategic petroleum reserves. So, now we would like to end the very discussion that we have started in 4 different lectures on West Asia and Middle East crisis, and as it is considered as the worst kind of war. War is sometimes necessary, said to defend a people and their territory against aggression. But there is a question regarding that of difference between just war. So, here in case, the very unsaid logic is usually electoral, have no redemptive logic. So, Trump's Iran war follows the script of George W. Bush Iraq War. He has led major tariff which are predicted to result in major reversal in US midterm polls. But regarding the West Asia Middle East war, we would like to discuss about George W. Bush case for Iraq war was built on the fiction that Saddam Hussein had developed weapons of mass destruction and was also connected to the 9/11 terrorist attack. It was found across media, Congress, and United Nations over 2 years. Operation Iraqi Freedom itself ultimately involved a coalition of many countries. Trump did not bother with all that, announcing Operation Epic Fury in an 8-minute video on Truth Social, accusing Iran of directly endangering America. All neutral experts disagree. Pentagon has reportedly briefed Republicans and Democrats that there was no intelligence about Tehran attacking US forces first. As for Iran's nuclear program, did not Trump say last year that obliteration was the accurate term for what Operation Midnight Hammer had done to it? Most damningly, Oman's foreign minister has underlined that Iran had just agreed to zero stockpiling of enriched uranium and to never ever possess nuclear material for a bomb. After Bush, there was Barack Obama's adventurism in Libya. It dislodged the then Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, but left behind a country destabilized to this test. Damages from Iraq war are also still compounding, and not just in the region in United States. We found this kind of war is not falling under a just war, so it could be entitled as the war of worst kind. So here I would like to conclude our fourth lecture, and that is relating to West Asia and Middle East crisis at present in connection to the joint airstrike by Israel and United States over Iran, and which is codenamed as Operation Epic Fury.